Structuralism first emerged in the intellectual circles of France during the 1950s and 1960s. Dr. Rathod, could you explain how structuralists like Claude Lévi-Strauss and Ferdinand de Saussure approached the study of human culture?
Certainly, structuralists believe that culture can be decoded by examining its underlying structures, similar to how language is analyzed. They focus on binary oppositions such as male, female, and speech writing to uncover objective truths within cultural phenomena.
An illustrative example of this is Lévi-Strauss's analysis of myths, where he demonstrated how seemingly disparate tales share common structural elements. But what about critics who argue that these structures are too rigid?
That's a critical point. Critics suggest that while structuralism seeks systematic understanding, it often overlooks the fluidity and diversity of cultural expressions. Not all cultures fit neatly into binary frameworks, which can limit structural analysis.
In moving forward, do you think modern structural analysis can adapt to these criticisms?
Adapting is essential. By integrating insights from post-structuralism, structural analysis could evolve to accommodate more dynamic and context-sensitive interpretations, embracing the complexities of culture beyond rigid binaries.
Turning to post-structuralism, which emerged as a critique of its predecessor, how does it challenge the notion of fixed meanings in texts and cultural artifacts? Dr. Rathod.
Post-structuralism, largely influenced by thinkers like Jacques Derrida, argues that meaning is not fixed but rather constructed. It highlights how interpretations are shaped by historical and cultural contexts, making them inherently unstable.
Interestingly, Derrida's method of deconstruction showcases this by revealing the contradictions within texts. But doesn't this approach risk making meaning too subjective?
That's a common concern. Critics argue that post-structuralism's emphasis on fluidity can lead to interpretative chaos. However, proponents counter that it enriches our understanding by acknowledging the multiplicity of perspectives and power dynamics at play.
As we look to the future, how might this perspective influence cultural studies?
It encourages a more nuanced approach where scholars consider diverse voices and contexts. This could lead to more inclusive and equitable interpretations that better reflect the complexities of human culture.
One of the main critiques post-structuralists have of structuralism is its reliance on binary oppositions. Dr. Rathod, can you elaborate on why this is a significant point of contention?
Absolutely. Structuralists use binary oppositions to define cultural structures, but post-structuralists argue these binaries are not universal. They suggest that binaries are culturally and historically conditioned and thus not as stable as structuralists propose.
Take, for instance, the gender binary. Many cultures recognize more than just male and female, which challenges the universality of such oppositions. But how do post-structuralists propose we analyze culture without these binaries?
They advocate for examining the interplay within and beyond binaries, emphasizing the fluidity and complexity of cultural meanings. This approach reveals the power dynamics inherent in the creation and perpetuation of these binaries.
Looking ahead, what implications does this have for future cultural analysis?
It suggests a shift towards more flexible frameworks that account for cultural diversity and change over time, potentially leading to richer and more inclusive analyses of human culture.
Deconstruction is a hallmark of post-structuralism, particularly in literary criticism. Dr. Rathod, could you explain how deconstruction reshapes our understanding of texts?
Deconstruction, as introduced by Derrida, involves dissecting texts to expose inherent contradictions and instabilities in meaning. It challenges the idea of a single, authoritative interpretation, suggesting that texts are open to multiple readings.
Consider Shakespeare's works, often analyzed through various lenses. Deconstruction would encourage examining these texts for hidden biases and unspoken assumptions. But does this risk diminishing the author's intent?
Indeed, it's a contentious issue. Traditionalists argue it undermines the author's role, while post-structuralists assert that meaning is co-constructed by readers and context, not solely authorial intent. This democratizes textual interpretation.
In terms of future literary studies, what potential does deconstruction hold?
It offers the potential for more dynamic and interactive engagement with texts, encouraging readers to question and reinterpret, fostering a deeper appreciation for literature's complexity and its socio-cultural influences.
Dr. Rathod, let's start with structuralism. Ferdinand de Saussure famously described language as a system of signs. Could you elaborate on this concept?
Certainly, in structuralism, each sign is made of a signifier like the sound or written form and a signified, which is the concept. Saussure emphasized that meaning emerges from relationships between signs in this system, akin to how chess pieces gain meaning through their positions.
So, structuralism focuses heavily on language's internal structure. But doesn't this approach overlook historical evolution or cultural influences?
That's a valid critique. Structuralism's synchrony overlooks diachronic aspects. While it provides clarity on language's systematics, it often ignores how cultural shifts can redefine meanings. For instance, gay has evolved significantly from its original connotations.
Interesting. Does this rigidity pose challenges when addressing linguistic diversity?
Indeed, it does. Structuralism posits universal linguistic principles, yet languages like Chinese, lacking tense, challenge these norms. Moving forward, integrating structural insights with cultural contexts could enhance our understanding of language's complexities.
Now, turning to post-structuralism, this movement seems to challenge structuralism's fixed meanings. How does it view language differently?
Post-structuralists argue that language's meaning is fluid and context-dependent. They see languages as dynamic systems influenced by power dynamics and cultural contexts, much like shifting sands shaping a coastline.
That's quite a metaphor. But doesn't this undermine the stability needed for communication?
It's a double-edged sword. While it complicates meaning, it reflects reality's complexity. Consider legal language which adapts to societal changes. Post-structuralism embraces this instability, arguing that it's crucial for evolution and negotiation in meaning.
And how does post-structuralism address the relationship between language and power?
Critical here is that language isn't neutral. Power shapes discourse, like how colonial languages impact indigenous dialects. Future research could explore balancing these dynamics, ensuring diverse voices influence linguistic evolution.
Let's delve deeper into the concept of the sign. How do structuralists and post-structuralists differ in their understanding of signifier and signified?
Structuralists view the sign as stable with fixed relationships between signifier and signified. However, post-structuralists like Derrida argue that meanings slide beneath the signifier, much like shifting tectonic plates beneath the Earth's surface.
Fascinating. But wouldn't this instability lead to communication breakdowns?
It can, but it also allows for richer interpretations. Think of poetry, where multiple readings enhance depth. While structuralism seeks clarity, post-structuralism celebrates this multiplicity, advocating for a broader understanding of texts.
Given these views, how should educators approach teaching language?
Educators might blend both approaches, teaching foundational structures alongside critical thinking about context and power. As global communication evolves, such a dual approach could foster more adaptable and culturally aware language users.
Finally, let's explore how structuralism and post-structuralism differ in their treatment of culture. What stands out to you?
Structuralism treats culture as a system of signs, aiming to uncover universal patterns. In contrast, post-structuralism views culture as a contested space where meanings are negotiated and power dynamics play a crucial role.
But doesn't this lead to a fragmented view of culture?
Future studies could integrate both views, exploring universal cultural themes while acknowledging local contexts. This dual approach could help us navigate cultural globalization, ensuring more inclusive and representative cultural discourses.
Structuralism, as an intellectual movement, focuses on uncovering the universal structures underlying human culture. Dr. Rathod, could you explain how structuralists view the role of context in this analysis?
Certainly, structuralists view context as secondary, focusing primarily on the internal structures of language and culture. They emphasize a synchronic approach, analyzing systems in their current state. For example, Saussures' model sees language as a system of signs where meaning arises from differences, not context.
This focus on stable structures seems to simplify cultural analysis. But what about critics who argue that ignoring context leads to oversimplification?
That's a valid critique. While structuralists aim for clarity by identifying universal patterns, critics argue this method overlooks the nuances of cultural and historical contexts. However, proponents believe this approach provides a clear framework for understanding cultural phenomena.
Looking forward, do you see this framework evolving to include more contextual elements?
It's possible. As interdisciplinary studies grow, integrating context without losing the structuralist essence could enrich our understanding of cultural systems, balancing the search for universality with contextual relevance.
In contrast, poststructuralism emphasizes the fluidity of meaning. Dr. Rathod, how does this perspective redefine the role of context?
Poststructuralists assert that context is central to constructing meaning. They argue that meanings are not fixed but are shaped by historical, cultural, and social factors. For instance, the interpretation of a text can vary dramatically across different cultural contexts, highlighting the role of power and discourse.
This approach acknowledges the complexity of cultural analysis. However, could it lead to interpretative chaos with no stable meanings?
Indeed, some critics worry that post-structuralism's embrace of fluidity can make it difficult to establish consistent interpretations. Yet, it offers a richer, more dynamic understanding of how meanings are negotiated and contested within power structures.
How might this perspective influence future cultural studies?
As we move forward, post-structuralism could foster more inclusive and diverse analyses by emphasizing voices and contexts previously marginalized, encouraging scholars to engage with the ever-changing landscape of cultural meanings.
At the core of their debate is the stability of meaning. Dr. Rathod, how do structuralists defend their position on stable meanings?
Structuralists argue that meaning is derived from relationships within a coherent system, allowing for systematic analysis. For example, in linguistics, signs gain meaning through their differences, suggesting a stable structure across cultures.
But don't post-structuralists challenge this view by emphasizing context-dependent interpretations?
Absolutely, post-structuralists critique the notion of fixed meanings, highlighting how interpretations can shift based on power dynamics and historical contexts. They argue that meaning is not inherent but constructed through interactions.
Is there a way to reconcile these perspectives in future research?
Reconciliation might come through hybrid approaches that acknowledge stable structures while incorporating the fluidity of context, offering a more nuanced understanding of meaning in cultural studies.
Power dynamics play a significant role in post-structuralism. Dr. Rathod, how do these dynamics influence the construction of meaning?
Post-structuralists emphasize that power relations shape how meanings are constructed and understood. For example, discourse analysis reveals how dominant narratives can marginalize alternative perspectives, shaping what is accepted as truth in society.
How do structuralists respond to this focus on power? In terms of future research, how might understanding power dynamics alter the study of culture?
Future research could increasingly focus on uncovering hidden power structures, fostering more equitable interpretations. This could lead to a deeper understanding of how meanings evolve in response to changing societal power dynamics.
Dr. Rathod, structuralism is known for its focus on universal structures. Can you elaborate on how this approach attempts to decode human culture through stable patterns?
Certainly, structuralists analyze cultural artifacts like language and myths to identify underlying patterns. For example, Claude Lévi-Strauss studied myths to reveal recurring structures, suggesting universal rules in human cognition.
Fascinating. However, some critics argue that such a focus neglects the variability of human experience. What are your thoughts on this critique?
It's a valid point. While structuralism emphasizes stability, it can overlook individual and contextual nuances. critics argue that this limits its applicability in understanding dynamic cultural changes.
Looking ahead, how might structuralism adapt to accommodate these critiques while maintaining its core principles?
Future adaptations could involve integrating more flexible analytical frameworks, perhaps by incorporating insights from cognitive science to better account for variability without abandoning the search for patterns.
Shifting to post-structuralism, it challenges the fixed nature of meanings. Dr. Rathod, how does this approach redefine our understanding of language and culture?
Post-structuralism posits that meanings are fluid and context-dependent. Mitchell-Foucault, for example, explored how power shapes discourse, suggesting that what we consider truth is often a reflection of dominant ideologies.
Yet, isn't there a risk of falling into relativism, where any interpretation becomes valid? How do post-structuralists address this concern?
That's a key debate. Post-structuralists argue that acknowledging fluidity doesn't negate the possibility of critical analysis. They emphasize deconstruction to uncover hidden assumptions rather than justifying all interpretations.
In terms of future implications, how might post-structuralism influence emerging fields like digital humanities?
It could lead to more nuanced analyses of digital texts, highlighting how online platforms mediate power relations. This perspective might reshape our approach to digital content creation and analysis.
Let's explore the debate further. Dr. Rathod, how do structuralists respond to post-structuralist critiques regarding the rigidity of structures?
Structuralists might argue that identifying stable structures doesn't preclude recognizing change. They see structures as frameworks that can evolve, much like a city's underlying grid informs but doesn't dictate its growth.
Conversely, post-structuralists emphasize flexibility. Could this lead to analytical chaos where no stable ground exists for interpretation?
While some fear it might, post-structuralists see it as an opportunity for richer, more diverse interpretations. They argue that embracing complexity can yield deeper insights into cultural phenomena.
How might this ongoing dialogue shape academic pursuits moving forward?
The dialogue encourages interdisciplinary approaches, blending structural analysis with context-focused studies. This synthesis could foster innovative methodologies across social sciences and humanities.
Considering the evolution of these theories, what future directions do you foresee in cultural analysis?
We're likely to see a convergence of structuralist and post-structuralist insights. For instance, integrating AI-driven analytics can offer new ways to explore both stable patterns and contextual nuances in cultural data.
Could technological advances potentially overshadow traditional theoretical frameworks in cultural studies?
In education, they could foster critical thinking by encouraging students to engage with multiple perspectives. For policymaking, these insights can inform more nuanced and culturally sensitive approaches.
Dr. Rathod, let's start with structuralism, where language is seen as a system. How does this view shape our understanding of reality? Fascinating. But doesn't this imply a stable reality, potentially ignoring personal and cultural nuances?
Indeed, structuralists focus on uncovering universal patterns suggesting a stable reality. However, this has been critiqued for overlooking individual experiences and historical contexts.
So, how do structuralists maintain objectivity in their analysis?
They seek truths independent of personal biases, similar to a scientist aiming for objectivity in a controlled experiment. Yet, critics argue this approach can miss the subjective nature of human experience. Post-structuralists view language as constructing reality, not merely reflecting it. Think of language as a lens through which we interpret the world, influenced by power dynamics and context.
That's quite a shift. Does this mean reality itself is fluid according to post-structuralists?
Exactly, reality is seen as fluid and constructed through language. A 2022 study highlighted how media narratives shape public perceptions, illustrating this fluidity.
But if reality is so variable, how can knowledge be reliable?
Post-structuralists challenge the notion of objective truths, suggesting knowledge is always tied to power dynamics, much like how historical narratives can vary based on the storyteller's perspective.
How do structuralists and poststructuralists differ in their approach to objectivity in language analysis?
Structuralists strive for objective analysis to uncover universal truths, akin to a mathematician finding a formula. Conversely, poststructuralists argue that objectivity is a myth, as interpretations are shaped by power and context.
Does this mean poststructuralists reject all forms of truth?
Not exactly. They emphasize that truths are contextual and multiple. For example, a 2021 discourse analysis showed varying interpretations of political speeches across cultures, highlighting this multiplicity.
How do these differing views impact cultural studies?
They lead to diverse methodologies. Structuralists might focus on finding patterns in myths, while post-structuralists could explore how cultural narratives shift over time, revealing the power behind those shifts. As digital communication grows, the interplay of language and power becomes more complex. Future theories might merge structuralist and post-structuralist insights to better analyze digital narratives and their global impact.
Could you provide a hypothetical scenario where these insights are applied? What challenges might arise in integrating these perspectives?
Balancing the search for universal patterns with acknowledging contextual nuances is challenging. Yet, doing so could lead to richer, more comprehensive cultural analyses that address both stability and change.
Dr. Rathod, many listeners are curious about the fundamental differences between structuralism and post-structuralism. Can you explain how these philosophies approach culture and language?
Absolutely. Structuralism views cultural and linguistic structures as stable entities, akin to a building's framework, suggesting that these structures underpin universal truths across societies. In contrast, post-structuralists argue that these frameworks are influenced by power dynamics and cultural contexts, much like how a city's skyline changes over time.
It's fascinating, yet some might argue that structuralism provides a clear method for cultural analysis. How do post-structuralists respond to this perceived clarity?
Post-structuralists challenge structuralism's reliance on fixed meanings, suggesting instead that meanings are fluid and context-dependent. They also question the objectivity of structural analysis, positing that knowledge is always shaped by broader systems of power, much like how different lenses can alter a camera's focus.
Given these critiques, what future directions or insights do post-structuralists offer for analyzing cultural phenomena?
They encourage a more nuanced approach to understanding culture, one that embraces multiple interpretations and recognizes the influence of power dynamics. This forward-thinking perspective is essential as we navigate increasingly complex social landscapes.
Binary oppositions are a key tool in structural analysis. Dr. Rathod, how do post-structuralists view these oppositions, such as male, female, or speech writing?
Post-structuralists argue that binary oppositions oversimplify the complexities of human culture. They assert that meaning arises not from stark contrasts but from intricate interplays and differences, much like how colors emerge from blending rather than isolation.
However, isn't the clarity of binaries helpful in understanding cultural structures?
While binaries offer a straightforward framework, they often reinforce hierarchies and dominant ideologies, similar to how predefined roles in a play limit character development. Post-structuralists advocate for breaking down these binaries to reveal hidden complexities.
So, how might this perspective shape future cultural studies?
By deconstructing binary oppositions, researchers can uncover more inclusive and dynamic interpretations of cultural phenomena, paving the way for more equitable representations in societal discourse.
Structuralism often claims objectivity in analyzing language and culture. How do post-structuralists critique this notion, Dr. Rathod?
Post-structuralists argue that objectivity is a myth, as all knowledge is constructed and influenced by historical and ideological contexts, akin to how a historian's perspective can color the interpretation of events. They emphasize the role of subjectivity in shaping meanings.
Yet, isn't objectivity crucial for unbiased cultural analysis?
While objectivity aims to minimize bias, post-structuralists highlight its limitations, suggesting that it often ignores the power dynamics that shape knowledge. It's like pretending a referee in a sports match can be completely neutral despite inherent biases.
What future directions do post-structuralists envision for cultural analysis?
They advocate for an approach that acknowledges subjectivity and power influences, promoting a more reflective and critical analysis of cultural narratives, which is vital in our increasingly complex global society.
Dr. Rathod, applying post-structuralist theories in real-world contexts is often seen as challenging. What are some of the main obstacles? Is there a way to balance these complexities with practical applications?
The key is developing sophisticated analytical frameworks that can accommodate these complexities without oversimplifying. Consider it like designing a multi-tool that can adapt to various situations without sacrificing functionality. Future applications may involve integrating technology and interdisciplinary approaches to better operationalize post-structuralist insights, ultimately enriching our understanding of cultural and social dynamics.